Welcome, everyone, to another episode of the New Liberal Podcast, part of the Center for New Liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremiah Johnson, and in this episode, we are talking about the election. We're talking about the results, what's happened, how people feel about it. We are going to analyze what happened, talk about the factors in play for the election result we got, and the issues that colored people's perceptions of Republicans and Democrats, whether it was the economy, whether it was cultural stuff. We're going to talk about the problems that exist within the Democratic coalition. We're going to talk about different theories of politics and how some of them have really taken a pretty large political hit here in terms of just how does politics work. We're going to talk about the internet and how different theories of online engagement were kind of tested in this election. We are going to talk about internal coalitions and different camps within the Democratic Party. And we are going to talk about the Center for New Liberalism and what we stand for, and frankly, why I believe that the Center for New Liberalism is needed now more than ever. And what our response as an organization should be and will be. Obviously, this was not the election result that we hoped for. We did not want Republicans to win the presidency with Donald Trump. We did not want them to take the Senate and the House as well. But that's what we're looking at, and it's time to figure out where we go from here. As always, thank you for listening to the podcast. Thank you for being part of the Center for New Liberalism, especially to those of you out there who were out there working, volunteering, trying to make a difference, fighting for the things you believe in. A special thanks to you. If anyone's listening to this and decides they do want to get involved and they're interested in trying to be part of the solution to the problem that we are now facing, I would invite you to join us. I would invite you to join us at cnliberalism.org. You can find a local chapter. You can get involved with that local chapter. You can become a member of the Center for New Liberalism if you want to support the organization and get involved. So again, that's cnliberalism.org. Let's get into the episode. So before we get into all of the analysis and all of the political theorizing and kind of describing what happened and describing whose theories are good and whose theories are bad and who's at fault and who's to blame and all of those kind of things, I want to start with a little bit more of a personal message. There's probably a lot of people out there who are feeling pretty despondent over the election. It's been a week now since Donald Trump was elected. And I know that especially in the first couple days, a lot of people that I know were basically walking around like zombies. Like, the life had been sucked out of them. And look, I don't blame you for feeling that way. I, too, am very, very concerned about what's going to happen. I'm concerned about a lot of different things, frankly. I'm concerned about the economy and what many of Trump's policies are going to do to the economy. I'm concerned about reproductive rights in this country. I'm concerned about my LGBT friends and whether bad things are going to start happening to them. I'm concerned about immigrants who live in this country. I'm concerned about democracy and whether our democratic norms are going to weaken. If you are, really, really concerned, I think you're right to be concerned. But I also think that we should not wallow in that too much. If you want to give yourself a day or two of wallowing, certainly. If you want to give yourself a full week of wallowing, again, I'm not going to stop you. It's already been a week. But I do think at this point, we have to recognize that life goes on. Politics is not something that has an end date. We are never finished with politics. We are never finished with improving society. And that includes times when we win, and that includes times when we lose. And it's also important to realize that politics is not the only thing going on in your life. If your kid has a ball game, you're still going to be going to watch their game. You're still going to be doing the regular stuff you do. You're going to do your laundry tomorrow. You're going to call your mom. You're going to watch that fun TV show or that movie that you wanted to see on streaming. If you have a trip to see your family or a vacation scheduled, you're still going to get to do that. You're going to go to that birthday party or that concert that you had planned a couple weeks from now. All of that stuff is still going to happen. And it sounds insensitive maybe, but like life goes on. And it will shock you at times how normal it feels. Even though something very bad has happened, normal life will go on, and there will be times when you don't even think about it. And you kind of have to hold both of those things in your mind at the same time. And that is difficult. Sometimes we are maximalist creatures. We want to go all one way or all the other way. But my message is to do both. Yes, you should be upset. You should be on the lookout for things you can do to help. But you should not be paralyzed. You should not be despondent or depressed. That doesn't help anyone if that happens to you, and it doesn't help you either. It doesn't help make the nation's politics any better, and it doesn't make your life any better. So, just realize this is something we can move on from, and this is something we can work to fix. And this is something that has happened before. Other countries have elected people just as bad or worse, than Trump, and they've come back from it. And I'm not saying it's going to be a fun experience, but America is not doomed. America might be in a bad place for a few years, but we can work to fix this. So that's my, at least, partially optimistic view of the situation, is that, I'm pretty concerned, but I'm going to move on. I'm going to live my life. I'm going to keep doing the things that I enjoy. I'm not going to become depressed, and I'm going to focus on what we can do to fix it, what we can do so this doesn't happen again. With that said, let's get into some analysis of just what happened. The analysis is pretty simple. The Democrats lost basically everywhere. There's some interesting trends, and we can talk about them a little bit, but the large story is that the country as a whole just shifted to the right. If you look at one of those fun maps that's like breaking down the country by county or by state or whatever, and you compare the 2020 presidential vote to the 2024 presidential vote, I think just about every state in the union shifted to the right from 2020 to 2024. Just about every single state. There may be one or two exceptions. I think Colorado did not. I think Colorado just barely went a little bit left from 2020 to 2024. And we're going to get into that. I don't think it's an accident. Colorado is a very well-run state. It's controlled by Democrats, but it does not have the same level of pathology as like California or San Francisco or New York or some of the other big Democrat cities that are held up as examples of like poor governance. So we'll get back to that. But I've also seen maybe Washington shifted to the left a little bit, but I'm not sure whether that's real. I think they're still finalizing the vote count in Washington. Other than maybe one or two examples, the country just entirely shifted to the right. And this was especially true among a couple groups. Ironically, I think Democrats may have improved their standing with white people by maybe a point or something like that, maybe 2 points, or maybe some subgroups of white people. But what really happened was that Donald Trump mostly kept white people where they were and made huge, huge gains with Hispanics, especially Hispanic men. Hispanic men showed an enormous shift to Donald Trump. There's also been a pretty big shift among Gen Z men towards Donald Trump, to the point where, sometimes we have this assumption that every generation is more liberal or more progressive or more left-leaning or more democratic, however you want to say it, than the generation before it. That generations just always get more democratic. That is not happening here. Gen Z voted heavier for Trump, I believe, than millennials did. And especially Gen Z men were more Trumpy than millennial men. Now, as a millennial myself, I want to take credit for this personally, but then, that's a joke. But the main story here is just that the polls missed it. The polls, once again, underestimated the Trump vote. The polls missed, and the country shifted right, and Donald Trump won everything. Now, why did this happen? Why did we see the country shift to the right? I think there's a couple obvious things that we have to talk about. The first one is just the economy. Inflation was simply a really, really, really big deal. And I think it's something, I've said this before on the podcast, but I think it's something that we have collectively forgotten as a political class, that people really, really hate inflation. We haven't had high inflation in this country prior to the Joe Biden administration for a long time, for decades. And I think we just forgot as a political class how much people hate it. This is to the point where, people would rather vote for Trump because of the inflation. The party in power, when inflation happens, gets blamed, and people would rather vote for somebody who is a sexual predator, who has been, convicted of 34 felonies, who is a, pseudo-fascist, putrid pile of crap. They would rather have that than have moderately high inflation for a couple years. That is a tough lesson to learn. I think sometimes, the public is mistaken about this. I think their priorities are out of line, and that this, the Biden economy has done really, really well compared to the rest of the world. But, everywhere post-COVID in 2023 and 2024, the party in power is getting punished. It is a global surge of anti-incumbency. And frankly, the Democrats did okay compared to a lot of other parties worldwide that have been thrown out of power. They've done all right, but not enough to win. And I think that's just a lesson for the future. Never risk inflation. I think for the foreseeable future, no party is going to risk, creating inflation because they've seen what happens. It would be very easy to just blame this on the circumstances surrounding COVID and the inflation that happened after COVID, and just say, well, look, internationally, nothing could have been done. We were always doomed to lose. And the Democratic Party doesn't really need to learn any lessons out of this, because after all, this was just an international phenomenon. Everybody's getting thrown out. But I think that's wrong. The reason that I think that is wrong is because there are a number of Democratic senators who managed to do reasonably well, even in an environment where Kamala Harris struggled. And basically just about every senator in a competitive race did better than Kamala in the final vote total. Despite Democrats losing these states, the Democrats won Senate races in Arizona and Nevada, and they won the governorship in North Carolina. They won Senate races, I believe, in Wisconsin and Michigan. And these are all states that Donald Trump won in the presidential race, but the Democrats won down ballot. And by and large, those Democrats were able to more successfully break with the image of the Democratic Party. And so I think we have to talk about the image that the Democratic Party has as a national party and why it's a problem. If we behaved more like some of these senators and some of these governors that were able to win in states that are red or purple, I think we would be doing better. So what is the perception of Democrats that I'm talking about? Well, I think one of the most important things that people see when they think about Democrats is that big Democratic cities are run terribly. They are absolutely run terribly. And people don't want, what Democrats are selling, if what Democrats are selling looks like the chaos that they see in San Francisco, or, the rise in social disorder that you see sometimes in New York. And I'm not saying that San Francisco and New York are hellholes. I live in New York. I think it's a wonderful place to live. But there is kind of this perception of chaos and social breakdown that you have when you see, a ton of visible homelessness, when you see, public transit being taken over by drug users or, people who are ranting and raving, homeless people, like, people feel unsafe. And you can throw a crime stat at them that says, actually, New York has a lower murder rate than blah, 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 blah. But it's not going to change the fact that they feel weird about even going out in public because they're going to have to step over a homeless guy, or because the Tenderloin district is like a no-go area practically because there are open-air drug markets in San Francisco. Like, all of that is really, really hurting the perception that Democrats are actually the responsible party of the two parties. Another thing that I think we have to kind of face up that is not going to be popular with a lot of Democrats is that, frankly, the Democrats are now the party of being a humorless scold, being a nag, being a lecturer who just wants to lecture voters about what they should care about rather than listening to the voters and hearing what they do care about. And this is an odd thing to me because I grew up, I was a 90s kid for the most part, and early 2000s as well, I suppose. And when I was coming up, Republicans were the humorless party. They were the party who was going to get outraged that something was said on television that was just so inappropriate. And this was usually coming from like a Christian point of view, and the moral majority was a big political force back in the day. And like this was a very much like the Republicans get mad at people for what they say, and they're the ones who are humorless, and they like try to cancel a comedian who does some edgy joke. And that's always how I've thought of politics, but it's pretty clearly not the case anymore. I don't know exactly how and when this happened. I have my theories, but Democrats are now the party of criticizing people who step out of line, criticizing people who make a joke they don't like, criticizing people who, I don't know. They are the party that will lecture you about what you should believe. And frankly, I think that's dangerous. Nobody likes to be lectured. I don't know if this is like a revelation to anyone, but lecturing people and nagging people is not usually a great political strategy. And I don't really want to get too deep into like the specific things we're talking about, whether it's DEI or trans issues or the border or whatever, but like I think we do have to at least recognize you might not be happy about this. You might think that it's entirely appropriate to lecture certain people on certain topics, but like people don't like that. That is a losing strategy in the long run. And I think it's used against us on wedge issues that have to do with LGBT stuff or woke stuff or just these cultural things. Some of those issues are winners and some of those are not. Another big factor that comes into play here is immigration and the border. And, people really hate the perception of chaos at the border. When there is a surge of illegal immigration, people really are concerned about that. And this is a really difficult question for us because I believe immigration is good. And I think the entire organization believes immigration is good. And one of the reasons we exist is to promote the belief that immigration is good. But it is pretty clearly a losing issue right now. And there's a really difficult conversation about, how do we concoct a winning political strategy while also staying true to our beliefs? That's going to be a challenge. I don't have a perfect answer for you. It's tough because it's pretty clear at this point that Democrats need to expand the tent. We need to bring more people in to the tent. Our coalition as it exists right now may not be big enough, and we need to make it bigger. We need to welcome more people, and that includes people who disagree with us on some stuff. That's going to include people who want to crack down on immigration maybe, or who don't buy into they're like, I don't buy into all the LGBT stuff, like, or I think wokeness has gone too far. I don't like affirmative action. I don't want to get too far into specific examples, but like partially because I know I'll get yelled at, which is part of the problem. but like we have to welcome more people into the party. And I think the Democrats have a problem that we do not welcome people into the party. We are the party of scolds who shout people out of our party if they disagree with us on something. This is not to say anything about my personal beliefs or what the Center for New Liberalism should believe. But I think it's a problem that somebody who wants to increase legal immigration, but also crack down on illegal immigration, will be shouted out of the party by activists. I think it's a problem that Democrats who support Israel get protested relentlessly from the Democratic Party's left wing. I think it's a problem that, for instance, somebody who wants trans people to have every right and to be able to change their gender legally and have legal protections in the workplace and housing will still be called a bigot if they say that trans people shouldn't be doing sports, for instance. I'm not saying we all have to believe the same, I'm not saying you have to have a certain belief, but I'm saying that Democrats need to be able to have voting camps that don't all believe the same exact party line. I think it's a problem that we shout people out because we are narrowing the base and we are enforcing ideological purity, and it's causing us to lose. And that's a really tough reality to face, that when you've lost an election, that you have to expand the base and welcome people who might disagree with you. One of the other theories that I want to get into is kind of, there's different theories of politics, and there's different theories of what matters, what wins elections, what messaging strategies wins elections, what policies will be good and will be supported by people. There are two things that are really interesting that have kind of been on display during the Biden administration. One theory is called deliverism. And the theory of deliverism is very simple. You have certain interest groups that you want to support you, and maybe they traditionally support you, and you deliver them wins. You deliver them specific policies that help them, and they support you even stronger. They will, do anything you want. They will vote the way you want, and they will continue to be in your camp because you delivered. You gave them some policies they want. You directly impacted their checkbook and helped them get more money in the checking account. The other theory is that voters mostly just hate change, and they hate everything, and they especially hate big change that they can see, and that big things that you do don't get rewarded, but they get punished. This is almost the idea of political capital, right? You come into office with a certain amount of political capital, and you spend it down. And as you do big stuff, you might take a hit, but that's the point of, getting elected, is to do big stuff, right? Is to take the hit, but you take it because you want to actually pass the policy, but you don't expect to be rewarded for it. I think that the Biden administration and the history of their policymaking is essentially a death blow for the theory of deliverism. Biden passed more big progressive bills than any president has passed in generations, certainly since LBJ, and the left did not reward him for it. Biden passed the CHIPS Act, which was a huge, $600 billion investment into manufacturing in America. He passed the Inflation Reduction Act, which was the biggest clean energy and pro-environment, climate change bill that's ever been passed by any country in the world. The Inflation Reduction Act was named after inflation and maybe did contribute a little bit to bringing inflation down, but really was a clean energy act. And that's what the majority of it was. He passed, the Build Back Better. He passed the American Rescue Plan. We're talking about 4 different bills that were give or take $1 trillion. The smallest of those bills, I think, was CHIPS, which was $600 billion. The Biden passed an enormous amount and staffed his whole White House with Elizabeth Warren people, and gave them Lena Khan and the antitrust policy they wanted. Biden did so much for the progressive left wing of the party, and did they reward him for that? He delivered for them. Did they deliver in return? No. They loudly complained that he was a sellout and that he was genociding people in Gaza, despite reporting that, he really wants Israel to stop doing what they're doing. He can't make them. But no, the left just didn't reward him. They didn't care. They instead, a lot of them sat out the election or got real pissy and threatened not to vote. The left did not reward Joe Biden for what he did. And there's a pattern here. Unions also did not reward Joe Biden. Joe Biden was the most pro-union president we've had, again, in several generations. Joe Biden delivered personally, intervened into a bunch of union conflicts. He was just so visibly a union guy, and he talked about it all the time. And, I think he bailed out the Teamsters pension fund to the tune of $31 billion. The government just stepped in and bailed out their pensions because their pensions were bankrupt. And the government came in and said, hey, Teamsters, president's a union guy. He's got your back. And what did the Teamsters do? They did not even endorse him. The Teamsters declined to make an endorsement. And it's not just because their leader was a loser, was a Trump guy. It's because as a whole, union voters decided, hey, blue collar union guys, actually, we like Trump better. We don't care about this other stuff. Hispanics did not reward Biden, despite the other guy, being like, I'm going to deport Hispanics and calling Mexican immigrants rapists and killers. And the list of things that Trump has said about Hispanics is long, despite, very obvious racist undertones. Hispanics shifted towards Trump. The theory of deliverism is just wrong. And we're going to talk about the left in a second and their theories that we just have to go even further. We just have to break free from neoliberalism. We have to go even further into populist left rhetoric. But it's just not true. Biden tried that. He tried being the working class president, the union president, the progressive president, and nobody rewarded him for that. The theories that you can just win over voters by moving further to the left, they're just not true. Do you know who won? Which Democrat won the most support from the working class in the last 50 years? It was Bill Clinton, the one who is always slandered as a neoliberal. Bill Clinton won the support of the working class. And so that's something to think about. One of the other theories that I've been interested in, watching the kind of results come in and thinking about campaign strategies, is the difference between how the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign is the difference between how the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign treated the internet and the digital media ecosystem. One of the things that was really interesting to me was that virtually all cycle, the Trump campaign was really, really online, much more so than the Harris campaign. You could kind of see this with podcasts. Trump leaned into podcasts really, really hard. And Kamala did a couple podcasts. She did a pretty viral hit on Call Me Daddy or Call Her Daddy, which is a very popular podcast. She went on the All the Smoke podcast, but she did a couple. Trump did dozens of these podcasts. Trump did a podcast with Logan Paul. He went live on Twitch with Aiden Ross, or on Kick, I'm sorry. He went on the Barstool Sports podcasts. He went on Joe Rogan. He went on Andrew Scholes, on Theo Vaughn. He did the Nelk Boys. He did Lex Friedman. He did Sean Ryan. He did the All In podcast. And he also sent J.D. Vance around to do a bunch of these. And Elon Musk did some of these as well. The campaign strategy was pretty clearly heavily focused on podcasts. You could also just tell how online they were because of what they focused on. The Trump campaign was really easily distracted by very stupid online discourses, I will say. They got caught up in the Haitians eating cats thing. They got caught up in this. This was weird that 4 days before the election, it became a story that some squirrel got euthanized. Somebody's pet squirrel was euthanized by the cops. And it became a conservative rallying cry. And the House GOP account was tweeting about it, and J.D. Vance mentioned it in a stump speech, and it's just weird online shit. they gave speaking slots at the RNC to social media stars, and the whole thing was just very, very online. Harris, by contrast, had some online stuff, but like she dominated the campaign in the traditional ways that you're supposed to dominate a campaign. She got a lot more endorsements from like heavyweight politicos and like other, former Republicans, former members of Trump's cabinet endorsed her. She raised more money. She spent more on like traditional television advertising. She hired more professional operatives to work in battleground states. Her ground game actually was perhaps the largest and best campaign of door knockers and phone bankers ever. Whereas Trump's ground game, to some extent, barely existed. Like, I think he outsourced his ground game to Charlie Kirk and Elon Musk, and Charlie Kirk kind of just grifted the money and got very little accomplished. And Elon Musk's was, he set up a political action committee that was largely incompetent and didn't get much done. And so to a first approximation, like there were no Trump door knockers, certainly not very many anyway. And, in the run up to the election, I kind of criticized the Trump approach and I made fun of it and I called them weird, just like everybody else. But maybe the joke is on me because Trump's hyper online campaign delivered results. Maybe podcasts matter more than door knocking. And I promise you, I'm not saying that just because I have a podcast. I'm not saying that just because I want it to be true. I don't know. I think over the last few years, the conservative media ecosystem in the digital space has really become influential at bringing people in and converting them. And, the conservative podcast landscape has exploded. I think it matters that Elon Musk bought Twitter. The conservative movement went all in on digital and social media, and it appears to have worked. I don't know. It's possible to overstate this. I still think door knocking matters to some extent. To my eye, the results that I see are that Harris lost ground everywhere. Democrats lost ground everywhere, but they lost less in battleground states. They did somewhat better in battleground states. And so maybe those door knockers and those campaign operatives, have some effect. But I don't know. I can't help but think about the 2000s and the 2010s when people would say things like, look, the internet is not real life. You need to log off of Twitter. You need to talk to real people and get off the internet. And I don't think that's correct. If it was ever correct, I don't think it's correct anymore. I think it's more correct to say almost the people knocking on doors need to get back on the internet, get off the street, get back onto Twitter. You've got to fight in these online spaces. And I think the democratic urge, the progressive urge to just exile people and refuse to participate if they ever disagree with you is bad. There's kind of an old saying that, like, if you disagree with a progressive on one issue, you're not a progressive. Whereas if you agree with the alt-right on one issue, they will happily welcome you and call you alt-right. And that's a bad dynamic for us if you care about these kinds of causes. Some of this has caused a bunch of hand-wringing about, can there be a liberal Joe Rogan? We need our own liberal Joe Rogan. But the thing about Joe Rogan is that he's a weird guy with a bunch of idiosyncratic beliefs. And it kind of all nets out to be centrist in the end, all of his weird mishmash of ideas. And so the liberals can't create a Joe Rogan because as soon as he started being Joe Rogan, they would exile him. They would throw him into the fire for saying, a joke that violates some woke principle. I don't know. And but that's what appeals to people, is that Joe Rogan's kind of an everyman who does have weird, contradictory beliefs. And so you've got to be able to welcome people like that. And we used to. Joe Rogan voted for Obama. I think he said he voted for Biden in 2020. But I think Joe Rogan has actually said, I think Obama is the best president of my lifetime. If you're looking for a Joe Rogan that liberals can win over, we've already got one, and his name is Joe Rogan. We cast Joe Rogan out of the camp. rather than him leaving voluntarily. I really believe that is what happened. And I know there will be people who are like very upset at the idea that we like need to accept people with bigoted views back into the camp. But yeah, man. Yeah, we do. You think there were no racists who voted for Obama? There were a ton of racists who actually voted for Obama. Like, we have like on camera, I'm pretty sure, I don't want to go look this up because I don't want my search history to be weird, but I'm pretty sure we have voters on camera saying, yeah, I voted for the N-word because he appealed to them. I don't know how to explain it, man, but this is a thing that happens. You have to be able to appeal to those people somehow. And if you can appeal to them, you then also have to be willing to accept them as voters in your camp without lecturing them so much that they leave. I'm not saying you have to love that reality, but I'm saying that is the reality. And it just hurts Democrats that we don't do that. And it hurts Democrats that we have this dynamic that there's a right-wing media, there's an entire right-wing media ecosystem totally separate from the mainstream media, and it exists just to bash Democrats. And then there's kind of sort of a left-wing media ecosystem, kinda. It's not nearly as big or influential as the conservative one. It's not as well funded. But there is this progressive left media ecosystem, and that one also exists to bash Democrats. And that dynamic ain't super great for Democrats. And so since we're on the topic, we should talk about the left specifically. And I recognize that I am saying this as someone who is in the neoliberal camp or the moderate camp or the centrist camp or, however you want to name this movement. But while recognizing that I am biased, and obviously I am somebody who is kind of politically positioned against the left, I do think the left is finished for a little while. They've never really been a strong political force in America, but they are especially not now. Democrats have tested the idea, we just need to spend a lot of money. We need to do a lot of big spending bills, and we need to give them all the staffing positions in the White House. And it didn't work. And then they rewarded Democrats, they rewarded the party by, sitting out the election and threatening to blow up and going to protest the Democratic candidate. Democrats should and hopefully will toss them into a lake of fire. They should not have a place at the table with how they've acted this election. They spent the last year, frankly, hyper fixating on an issue that did not matter at all to the electorate. And that is Israel-Palestine. And, frankly, look, I'm sorry if you deeply care about Israel-Palestine. I really am. But factually, nobody else in the election cared. You look at what people cared about, you ask them, maybe 1% to 2% of voters listed as like a really important factor. The voting base did not care about Israel-Palestine. And again, I'm not saying you have to be thrilled by that, but I'm saying that's how it is. It is a tiny minority of people who decided to try to blow up the Democratic Party and to try to blow up Kamala Harris's election from the left because she did not go in the maximalist Palestine direction. And this is, again, this is an administration that delivered them more wins than they could have dreamed of. Because in the 2020 primary for Democrats, Biden was the single most moderate candidate. Every other candidate raced super, super far to the left. Every candidate was competing with each other to be as far left as they can. And Biden was the only one who kind of sort of stayed moderate. He was still to the left of Obama in the primary, but like only by a little bit. And voters chose him. Voters chose the single most moderate candidate. They could have chosen Warren. They could have chosen Bernie. They could have chosen any number of other people. They chose the moderate guy. And even then, despite being the most moderate candidate in the primary, Biden decided, you know what? I am going to buy into Elizabeth Warren's theory of politics. I'm going to staff my White House entirely with her people. I'm going to, appoint Lena Khan. I'm going to appoint all sorts of Elizabeth Warren types to federal positions. I'm going to pass a ton of huge bills. And it turns out that people don't care about it. The left doesn't care about that. They spent too much, they instead whined that their, DoorDash burrito cost too much. Biden delivered for them and they did not deliver back in return. And frankly, it's insane that like senators like Bernie Sanders and Chris Murphy are like doubling down on like, we just have to do even more economic populism. This loss is due to neoliberalism. This we have to go back to appealing to the working class. Like, again, the working class abandoned Biden, and he was the most working class focused president of my lifetime. And he was the most economically populist Democrat of my lifetime, and they abandoned him. Bill Clinton is the one who actually won the working class. And nobody on the left wants to grapple with that fact. Because of all that, I think it's time to really talk about the Center for New Liberalism and where we go from here. The first thing that I want to say is that I think this is really, it's an important time for us to exist. It's important for our voice to be heard. And we're in a tough spot. America has turned away from a lot of the values that we hold dear. America has turned away from immigration. It is not popular anymore. America has turned away from social liberalism to some extent. Now, on issue votes, if you ask people, do you care about abortion? Things like abortion rights do very well when they're by themselves. But by and large, the Democrats are seen as too far to the left. And social liberalism is part of that. And it's troubling. It's really troubling. America has turned away from free trade. America has turned away from, a liberal democracy and respect for our institutions. People seem to hate the institutions more than they hate the sledgehammer, if that makes sense. If Donald Trump is a wrecking ball, they might kind of dislike the wrecking ball, but they dislike the institutions more. Joe Biden kind of responded to anti-immigrant and anti-LGBT sentiment by going populist on industrial policy and trade and labor. And it got him very little because I think there is just, it was never about industrial policy or trade or labor. It was just authentically anti-immigrant feeling and authentically anti-LGBT feelings. And so there is a real need for someone like us who will champion those values, because frankly, there's not going to be a lot of people who want to champion immigration or free trade. CNL is just needed to defend what we care about. More than ever, we need someone to speak up about this stuff. But at the same time, Democrats need to moderate. We cannot be the party that lectures people about what they should believe. We must meet voters where they are, at least to some degree. There's some level of persuasion that can be done, and I think we should try as hard as we can to persuade people that immigration is good, that free trade is good, that social liberalism is good. But you can't persuade everyone, and you can't persuade them immediately when you can persuade them. It's a process that takes time. It does not happen overnight. And so, yeah, it's an uncomfortable situation about, what do we do on certain issues? Do we back down and stop talking about them? Do we, risk unpopularity and losing more by talking about them? Both options are not fun. I don't want to become a permanent minority party that never wins elections because we can't shut up about issues that are bad for us. But I also don't want to abandon my beliefs. And we've got to figure out the path forward. I don't have the precise answer for you, and it's going to take time to figure out what it is. I will also mention that, when we talk about these core beliefs, I think pragmatism is also a core belief here. It's certainly been on at least some versions of our We Believe card. When you sign up for a membership, you get a little card that, mailed to you that says, I'm a member of the Center for New Liberalism. This is what we believe. And it's got like 7 or 8 bullet points. And one of those, I'm not sure if it still is, but one of those used to be pragmatism over populism. And I really like that because you have to be pragmatic sometimes. So that's also a core belief, just worth mentioning. We are going to keep fighting as an organization. I think one of the things that we can do is to go all in on things that seem to be working, whether that is, the YIMBY movement, which seems to be very popular. It has a cross-partisan appeal. It can appeal to both some Democrats and some Republicans and some independents. And so we should continue to be as YIMBY as humanly possible, because number one, building more housing is correct. It is factually correct that it helps people, and it's a good thing to do in an objective sense. It will make society better to build more housing, but it can also be a winning political message. It can be a message that, hey, Democrats can actually bring down the cost of housing. If we can do this, we can bring down prices and make your life more affordable instead of less affordable. We can bring down housing inflation. And, that you can expand kind of the YIMBY agenda into a broader deregulatory supply side agenda for lots of things, for building more infrastructure, for building more green energy, to just build, and sweep away all the process and the bureaucracy that stops us from getting things done. I am not a big Elon Musk fan, but if there's one valuable thing that we take from Elon Musk, it's that he absolutely refuses to be told he can't do something. When he got into electric cars, it was seen as a terrible boondoggle industry. Nobody makes money in electric cars. Are you an idiot? And yet he was like, don't tell me I can't do it. I can do it and I will do it. And then he went out and did it. And, something similar happened with SpaceX. Space was viewed as kind of the idiot's industry. Nobody sinks money into trying to do a private space company unless you're a moron. Everyone knows you can't make that work. Well, SpaceX now has revolutionized the whole field. And Elon kind of has a disrespect for a lot of different processes and bureaucracies, and he just wants to move fast and break things. And that's the classic, tech stereotype, right? Is move fast and break things. But there's value to that. There's value to just saying, I refuse to accept that I have to do 800 pages of NEPA report and go through 3 years of community hearings in order to just build this train line. We should just wipe that all away and just build the train line. And look, we can have a conversation about how we do that smartly, but I think that's got to be part of it. We've got to be the party that actually gets things done. Another thing that I think we have to do is we have to fight more in digital spaces, because, part of the problem of this election was not just ideology. It's not just, Democrats are too woke, they did the wrong thing on this or that. It's also a strategy thing. And I think that we've been caught flat-footed by conservative digital strategies and conservative media ecosystems. We have to figure out how to build a liberal media ecosystem that rivals the conservative one. And I'm not talking about the New York Times. I'm not talking about the Washington Post. I'm talking about the personalities, the YouTubers, the podcasters, the independent outlets. Some of that exists, but it's just not nearly as good as what the conservatives have set up, frankly. And we've got Elon Musk buying Twitter to turn it explicitly into a conservative site. We've got so much money that pours into that space. We've got to figure out how to build in that space our own voices and also appeal to the Joe Rogan-like moderates who, frankly, can swing an election. That's something we've got to do. There are other things that, people will debate in the coming days and weeks and months and years about what direction Democrats should head, what direction Democrats should choose, how the Democratic Party should respond. And CNL is going to be a lively, engaged part of that discussion. We are going to fight for our values and fight for a party that can welcome people and build a bigger tent and win, so that, in order to implement our values, the first thing you have to do is win. I want to close by thanking everyone who fought in this election, who is out there fighting for the ideas that we care about, who volunteered, who worked, who knocked on doors, who phone banked, who posted online. Even if you're just a highly engaged person trying to convince people online, there are times where that can matter too. Anybody who's out there fighting the good fight, talking to your friends, talking to your relatives, thank you. I don't want you to feel like, everything was ultimately in vain. I don't want you to feel like this is the end of America. This is the end of liberalism. One of my favorite quotes is, weirdly enough, from a comic book movie. That's very millennial of me, I guess. But It's a quote from the movie Watchmen, and it's near the end of the movie, and one character is talking about this will be the end. And I believe it's Dr. Manhattan says, nothing ends, Adrian. Nothing ever ends. And that's how I feel about politics. I don't want you to get too down about this election, even though it was very bad, because this is not the end. This is just another beginning, and there will be an end to the Trump era. This is just another part of the process. Politics has been going on for thousands of years. American politics has been going on for centuries. Politics will still happen. We can still fight for what we believe in. Maybe things will change for the worse for a couple years, but this is not the end of the fight. This is not the end of liberalism. This is just another chapter that we have to work our way through, and that we can emerge out of stronger on the other side. So once again, thank you to everybody who listens. A special thank you to everybody out there who's, participated in the 2024 election. If you voted, you convinced a friend to vote. Thank you to everyone for being part of the Center for New Liberalism. We will still be here, and I hope you'll be with us. I'll catch you at the next episode. Goodbye.